The late 13th century was, well, a turbulent period for the Catholic Church, marked by both internal discord and external pressures. It was a time when the Church's influence was vast, yet its foundations were being tested like never before. The Papacy, which was supposed to be a symbol of unity and spiritual leadership, found itself increasingly embroiled in worldly affairs. The Church's role as a moral and spiritual guide was being overshadowed by its involvement in political power plays. Instead of focusing on spiritual matters, the Church's leaders were often caught up in political maneuvering and internal strife, which only deepened the cracks in its authority. You see, the death of Pope Nicholas IV in 1292 triggered a bitter power struggle among ambitious cardinals. Each faction sought to advance its own interests, leading to a prolonged and contentious deadlock. And well, the papal throne actually remained vacant for over 2 years. This period of vacancy, known as the interregnum, was unprecedented and deeply unsettling for the faithful. This interregnum really exposed the deep divisions within the Church and, frankly, weakened its authority. The lack of a clear leader left the Church vulnerable to criticism and further internal discord. The cardinals, unable to agree on a suitable candidate from their own ranks, began looking beyond the confines of the Roman Curia. This was a significant departure from tradition and underscored the desperation of the situation. The turmoil within the Church sent ripples throughout Europe, affecting not just the clergy, but also the laity. Communities that had long relied on the Church for guidance and stability were left in a state of uncertainty. The faithful, who had long looked to the Pope as a steady beacon of faith, were left feeling bewildered and honestly, quite anxious. Many began to question the Church's ability to lead in such troubled times. Without clear leadership, the Church struggled to address pressing theological and social issues. The absence of a unifying figure only exacerbated the challenges it faced both internally and externally. What the situation called for was a leader of exceptional piety and resolve, someone who could rise above the political fray and restore the Church's moral compass. Such a figure seemed almost impossible to find amidst the chaos. Little did anyone imagine that the answer would come from a humble hermit, living a life of solitude and prayer in the remote mountains of Italy. This unexpected turn of events would change the course of history in ways no one could have foreseen. Born Pietro Angelerio in 1215 in the Abruzzo region of Italy, a land of breathtaking natural beauty and ancient traditions, the man who would later be known as Celestine V lived a life that stood in stark contrast to the grandeur and opulence of the papal court. Orphaned at a young age, Pietro was shaped by hardship, which instilled in him a profound sense of piety and a yearning for spiritual solitude that would define his life. As a young man, Pietro made the bold decision to retreat from the world entirely, choosing to embrace the life of a hermit, far removed from the distractions of society. He sought refuge in the rugged and remote mountains of Morone, dedicating himself to a life of prayer, fasting, and deep contemplation, seeking a connection with the divine. Living in a small, dark cave, Pietro embraced extreme austerity, surviving on meager rations and wearing only a simple hair shirt, a symbol of his renunciation of worldly comforts. Over time, his deep piety and unwavering devotion began to draw the attention of others, individuals who were inspired by his teachings and his example of radical simplicity. These followers admired his renunciation of worldly possessions and sought to emulate his way of life. Together they formed a small monastic community, united by their shared devotion and spiritual aspirations. This community would eventually grow and become known as the Celestines, a group dedicated to a life of prayer, poverty, and spiritual discipline, all inspired by Pietro's unwavering humility and devout way of living, which left a lasting legacy. The prolonged vacancy of the papal throne in the late 13th century was not just a political dilemma, but a spiritual crisis that shook the very foundations of Christendom. The Church, already burdened by internal divisions and external pressures, was pushed to the brink. The cardinals, locked in their own ambitions and rivalries, seemed, well, incapable of providing the leadership the Church so desperately needed. Their debates dragged on endlessly, with no resolution in sight. It was in this moment of crisis and uncertainty, when hope seemed distant and the Church's future hung in the balance, that Pietro Angelerio, the humble hermit from the Abruzzo Mountains, emerged as an unexpected beacon of hope. Known for his ascetic lifestyle and unwavering devotion, he was the most unlikely candidate for the papacy. Word of Pietro's piety and his reputation for holiness spread like wildfire, reaching far beyond his remote mountain retreat. Pilgrims and villagers alike spoke of his miracles and wisdom, and his name began to echo through the valleys and towns. His name, whispered among the common folk, carried a sense of hope and renewal. Eventually, these whispers reached the ears of some cardinals, who were desperate for a solution to the Church's turmoil. They began to consider Pietro as a potential answer to their prayers, a man who could restore unity and faith. Finally, in 1294, after more than 2 years of bitter infighting and mounting pressure, the cardinals, exhausted and desperate, made their decision. They turned to the unlikeliest of figures. They elected Pietro Angelerio to the papacy, a decision that would change the course of history. He humbly accepted and took the name Celestine V, stepping into a role he never sought but was destined to fulfill. Section 4. The weight of the papacy, challenges and conflicts. Celestine V's reign as pope was, well, brief and tumultuous. Thrust from a life of solitude into the center of political intrigue, he was frankly unprepared for the demands of his new office. Accustomed to a simple life of prayer and contemplation, he suddenly found himself surrounded by the pomp and ceremony of the papal court. It was a world away from the quiet isolation of his mountain hermitage. The cardinals who had elected him, hoping for a pliable figurehead, quickly realized their miscalculation. Celestine, though inexperienced in the ways of politics, possessed a strong will and a deep-seated commitment to his ideals of poverty and spiritual purity. He clashed with the cardinals over matters of church governance and appointments. His attempts to reform the Curia were met with resistance and, honestly, open hostility. Section 5. The reluctant Pope, Celestine V's resignation. As the pressures of the papacy mounted, Celestine V grew increasingly disillusioned. He came to realize that his true calling lay not in the gilded cage of the Vatican, but in the solitude of his mountain hermitage. Torn between his sense of duty and his longing for a simpler life, Celestine sought counsel from trusted advisors. He confided his doubts and his desire to return to a life of prayer and contemplation. After much soul-searching, Celestine V made the unprecedented decision to resign from the papacy. In a public consistory, he announced his intention to step down, citing his desire for spiritual renewal and his belief that he was not the right person to lead the church. His announcement sent shockwaves throughout Christendom. Never before had a pope voluntarily relinquished the throne of St. Peter. Section 6. A return to solitude. Celestine V. After the papacy. Following his resignation, Celestine V sought to return to the solitude of his hermitage. However, his successor, Boniface VIII, fearful of potential challenges to his authority, had Celestine confined to a small castle in Fumone. Despite the restrictions placed upon him, Celestine found solace in prayer and meditation. He lived out his final days in quiet dignity, stripped of the trappings of power, but at peace with his decision. Celestine's resignation, though initially met with shock and confusion, became a testament to his humility and his unwavering commitment to his spiritual calling. It challenged the prevailing notion of papal power as an unbreakable chain of succession. It served as a powerful reminder that even in the highest echelons of the Church, spiritual integrity and personal humility were paramount. Section 7. Legacy of Humility. Saint Celestine V of Celestine V died in 1296, less than 2 years after his resignation. He was buried in the church of his order in Ferentino. His tomb became a site of pilgrimage, venerated for his piety, his courage, and his unwavering dedication to his spiritual calling. In 1313, Celestine V was canonized as a saint by Pope Clement V. He is remembered as a symbol of humility and spiritual integrity in a church often riven by power struggles. Celestine V's papacy, though brief and troubled, left an indelible mark on the Catholic Church. His resignation, an act of unprecedented humility, served as a powerful reminder that the true measure of leadership lies not in the pursuit of power, but in the service of a higher calling.